it is the first architectural wonder of Middle-earth. The most majestic, the largest, the most magnificent, and most famous of all the work of the dwarves, and perhaps of any race in Middle-earth, is Khazad-dûm, the mansion of the Longbeard Dwarves. Today on Fantasy Archive, we cover the dwarven realm of Khazad-dûm, how the dwarves came to build it, what made them so rich, and how they lost their home to something dark and wicked.
Moria, you fear to go into those mines. The dwarves delved too greedily and too deep. You know what they awoke in the darkness of Khazad-dûm.
Khazad-dûm, later known as Moria, is an ancient subterranean complex in Middle-earth, comprising a vast labyrinthine network of tunnels, chambers, mines, and halls under the misty mountains, with doors on both the western and eastern sides of the mountain range. Moria is introduced in Tolkien's novel The Hobbit, and is a major scene of action in The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. Khazad-dûm, or Moria, the Black Pit, was the grandest and most famous of the mansions of the dwarves. There, for many thousands of years, a thriving dwarvish community led by Durin I created the greatest city ever known between the years of the trees, 1050 and 1250. The city's wealth was founded on its mines, which produced mithril, a fabulously precious and versatile metal found nowhere else in Middle-earth. Mithril was known for its great beauty. It shined as if it had light of its own. But more importantly, it was strong, for it was light as a feather's and as hard as dragon scales, suitable for armor and weaponry. The dwarves were beings short in height, usually friendly with hobbits, but very suspicious and distrustful when it comes to elves. They were generally blacksmiths and stoneworkers, unequaled in many of their crafts, not even by the elves. There were 7 dwarf houses. The most known was that of the Longbeards. The dwarves were created by the Valar Mahal, also known as Aule the Smith, the one who later teaches his smith skills to Sauron. Aule created the 7 fathers of the dwarves, from whom all dwarves are descended. Since he didn't have the power to create independent life, the dwarves were bound to his will. When Eru Ilúvatar found out, he scolded Aule, who then prepared to destroy his creations. The dwarves were scared and begged for mercy. Eru felt compassion and decided that the dwarves would emerge, but not before the firstborn elves. They would be his adopted children. The 7 fathers would then sleep underground and come forth after the elves awoke. About a century after elves awoke, the 7 fathers awoke in their places in pairs with their wives. Durin I, the Deathless, the eldest, awoke alone at Mount Gundabad, in Misty Mountains. He was acknowledged as preeminent among them. The 7 clans of the dwarves were the Longbeards, Durin's folk originally from Gundabad, the Firebeards and Broadbeams, originally from the Blue Mountains, Ironfists and Stiffbeards, originally in the east, and Bladelocks and Stonefoots, originally in the east. Each of the 7 fathers became kings of their clans, and each proceeded to build his own great hall. The first 3 halls to be known were Belagost and Nogrod, in the Blue Mountains, and Khazad-dûm in the Misty Mountains. Durin I came upon the valley of Azanul-Bizar, beneath the Misty Mountains. He could see a long series of waterfalls leading to a beautiful shimmering lake. He glanced into it, and saw himself with a crown of stars reflected in its waters. The stars looked like jewels, even in sunlight. He took this as a sign, and named the lake Khaled-Zerem, the Miriamir, and it remained a revered place among dwarves of all houses ever afterwards, though only Durin could see his own reflection. It was here that later Durin's stone would be erected. There above the lake, in the east-facing caves above, Durin and his people started the delving and building of the first gate, the eastern gate of Khazad-dûm, and the first hall. From there began the expansion, both to the levels above and to the deeps below, and mines branching out from the inhabited areas of the city. Durin's long reign was a golden age. Khazad-dûm grew continuously in size and population, and his realm became the greatest of all their mansions, and became famous even to the distant west, where the elves of Beleriand heard of its rumor from the dwarves of Belagost and Nogrod, the dwarf clans of the Blue Mountains. Under Durin's reign, some of the wonders of dwarvish architecture were built in Khazad-dûm. The first one being Durin's Bridge. 50 feet long, it was located near the east gate. It had no railing. It should act as a defense against any enemy who might get past the first gate and capture the first hall and its passages. Walkers on the bridge could only cross it in a single file. The bridge united with the first hall and the second hall being another architectural wonder. Its pillars were notable for being smooth and black, carved like trees with the boughs holding up the ceiling. It is visible in The Lord of the Rings: The Fellowship of the Ring, where they meet the balrog, Durin's Bane. The third wonder are the endless stairs. They go from far below Moria to the very peak of Ziraxigil, one of the peaks of the Misty Mountains. Finally, we get to Durin's Tower, carved out of the living rock of the mountain at the highest point of Ziraxigil, and could only be reached through the endless stairs. It was here where Gandalf defeated the balrog known as Durin's Bane in the Battle of the Peak. Durin the Deathless died before the end of the First Age, and was buried in a tomb in Khazad-dûm, and his descendants continue to rule. Occasionally in the following ages, a dwarf was born of this line that resembled Durin, and was considered to be the Durin Reborn. Prophecy said that Durin would be reborn 7 times, and that the coming of Durin the Seventh would mark the decline of the dwarves. Although the Longbeard clan didn't participate in any wars through Durin's reign, the dwarves of the Blue Mountains fought against Melkor during the First Age. Both dwarf kingdoms eventually were destroyed. In the Second Age, the Firebeards and Broadbeams from Norgorod and Belagost, who survived destruction, resettled in Khazad-dûm. This increased the city's wealth and power, for it was enriched not just in numbers, but in the Western House's lore and skills in smithing, crafting, and masonry. All these factors created a renaissance for Khazad-dûm, and brought its prosperity to its peak. The elvish Noldorian realm of Eregion was founded to the west of Khazad-dûm, and friendly relations were established between the Longbeards and the elves. Khazad-dûm had expanded so much that one could completely travel to the mountains from east to west, ending to the western rocky cliffs of the base, through the walls of Moria. The dwarf Narvi, great craftsman of Khazad-dûm, with his friend Celebrimbor, lord of Eregion, constructed the magical west gate of Moria. It was Celebrimbor, not Sauron, who eventually gives Durin III a ring of power. The ring didn't affect the dwarves as it did men, because Aule had made the dwarves especially resistant to evil domination. They became more greedy, but did not turn into wraiths like men. The friendship of Khazad-dûm and Eregion came to a sudden end. During the War of the Elves and Sauron, Sauron overran the country of the elves. The survivors, led by Elrond, were in danger. Durin III sent an army of dwarves which attacked Sauron's army from behind, allowing the elves to escape. Durin's warriors withdrew from the gates, and they shut them against Sauron, also secluding the kingdom off from the outside world. Sauron held a grudge. Orcs reinvaded the mountains and made war on the dwarves, taking Mount Gundabad from the kingdom of Durin. The orcs began multiplying and harassing the dwarves. Throughout the early Third Age, the dwarves of Khazad-dûm expanded their treasure. The majority of their wealth was based on their hoards of mithril. As the centuries passed, they dug deeper and deeper for the precious metal. Their deep digging unleashed a nameless terror, a balrog from the elder days, that wreaked dreadful destruction, and in slaying the king, Durin VI became known as Durin's Bane. In the following year, Durin's son, Nain I, was also lost, and the dwarves fled their ancient home and went into wilder land. After millennia as one of the richest cities in Middle-earth, Khazad-dûm stood dark and empty, for the brooding menace the dwarves had released. In that time, it was given a new name, Moria, the Black Pit. The monster, a balrog of Morgoth, lurked alone in Moria for nearly 500 years, until it was populated again not by dwarves, but goblins. The goblins coexisted with the balrog by avoiding it mostly. After that time, Sauron started to populate the old city with his troops of orcs and cave trolls, making it a stronghold for them to multiply. In 2989, there was an attempt by the Longbeards to reclaim the ancient home. The expedition was led by Balin, who had accompanied Bilbo Baggins on the quest of Erebor. He had led a colony of dwarves there from Erebor. The colony was successful at first, killing a considerable number of orcs, taking many of the eastern halls, and finding many lost treasures, such as Durin's axe. They were, however, defeated and slain by the orcs in 2994. Later on, when the Fellowship of the Rings sets out from Rivendell, they planned to travel over the Misty Mountains. They were stopped by the heavy snow on Mount Caradhras and fled into Moria, so as to go under the mountains. There they found Balin's journal in the Book of Mazarbul, and learned the fate of his expedition. They fought a cave troll and orcs, and they later discovered that the terror was, in fact, a demon, a balrog of Morgoth. Gandalf fought the balrog on a narrow bridge, and succeeded in destroying a section of the bridge to make the balrog fall. As it fell, the balrog snagged Gandalf's leg with its whip of thongs, and pulled him after it, sending them both plunging into the abyss. The rest of the Fellowship managed to escape Moria, and reach Lorien, mostly unharmed. Unknown to the Fellowship, both Gandalf and the Balrog survived the fall and fought a ferocious battle from the depths of Moria to the mountains above, demolishing the top of the legendary Endless Stair and a part of the surrounding mountain peak in the process. Gandalf cast down the Balrog upon the mountainside and lived long enough to see it die. With the destruction of the Balrog, the way was at last clear for the Longbeards to reclaim their home. Durin VII, the last, retook and brought Khazad-dûm back to its original splendor, and the Longbeards lived there until the world grew old and the days of Durin's race ended. You may wonder, how did the Balrog end up under Moria in the first place? In the First Age, the Valar marched against Morgoth in the War of Powers. Most Balrogs were defeated in the First Age, but it seems Durin's Bane was able to flee deep beneath the Misty Mountains, where it went dormant. If we took a look at the Ring of Powers series, there is the alternative that the Balrog is the Balrog from the Song of the Roots of Hithagler.